"Dad, can you come get us?" My son called at 10 in the morning. I found him sitting on the dock with 2 suitcases and my 6-year-old granddaughter. His father-in-law had him fired. That same morning, his wife filed for separation. He said our family wasn't good enough. I smiled and said, "Get in the truck." It was time he found out who the real boss was. I was in the garage when the phone rang, and I looked at the clock before I even reached for it. 10 in the morning. My son does not call it 10 in the morning. He runs his life the way I taught him to run an engine. Steady, predictable, no surprises if you can help it. He calls Sunday nights, after dinner, 20 minutes, and that's been the shape of our calls for as long as he's had his own household. I answered, "Son?" Nothing for a second, just breathing. The kind a grown man does when he's holding his own voice down with both hands. "Dad." The word came out broken in the middle, like it had been dropped, and he was trying to hand it to me anyway. Something in my chest pulled tight, the way a strap pulls down hard on a load about to shift. "Where are you?" I said. Not a question, really. I don't ask questions when a man sounds like that. You get the location first and sort out the rest with your boots already moving. "I'm at the park, by the lake, the dock. Can you—" His voice broke again. "Can you come get us?" Us. That one word did something I can't fully explain. Not fear, exactly. Something colder and more focused than fear. "Don't move," I said. "I'm already walking to the truck." I hadn't been back to that dock in probably 15 years. My son apparently had. I could see them before I got out of the truck. My son was sitting near the end with his knees pulled up and his shoulders rolled forward, the way a man sits when he's trying to take up less space than he actually does. 2 suitcases sat behind him, upright, packed fast, and down at the very end, in her school shoes, was my granddaughter, a stuffed rabbit under one arm, tossing bread into the water, completely absorbed in whatever conversation she was having with the ducks below her. She had no idea. I walked out and went to her first. That's the order things go in when there's a child involved. You steady the child before you deal with anything else. "Hey, sugar," I said, crouching down. "What you got there?" She held up the rabbit. "He's helping me feed the ducks." Hard worker, then. I stood back up and walked to where my son was sitting. He looked up at me, bracing for judgment he'd already decided he deserved. I didn't give him any. I sat down on the boards next to him and looked out at the water 4 or 5 seconds before I said a word. "Why aren't you at work?" I said finally. Level. Just a question that needed an answer before we could get to the next one. He made a sound shaped like a laugh with none of the substance of one. The noise a man makes when the hurt's gotten past where crying would help, and laughing's the only tool left in the box. "They let me go," he said. "Yesterday afternoon." "From the program?" He nodded, kept his eyes on the water. "Now, I need you to understand what that meant, because it wasn't just a job to my son. He's 35, a licensed physical therapist, and 9 years ago, he took over what was barely more than a folding table and a borrowed van, a scrap of a non-profit offering adaptive sports to kids and adults with disabilities. He built that into something real. Adaptive rowing on the river, wheelchair basketball twice a week at a rec center, something like 240 participants a year, more than half on scholarship. Every dollar of it raised himself, one grant application at a time for nearly a decade. That program wasn't just his job. It was the thing he'd built with his own 2 hands, in public, where everybody could see it. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice level. "Stay level. Tell me what happened." "His name's on the board," my son said. "Vice chair. Biggest single donor they've got." He rubbed the back of his neck, still not looking at me. "Came by the house Sunday night. Told him if I stayed in my role, his pledge wasn't renewing." "How much?" $400,000 over 3 years. I did the math and understood immediately why a board would fold under that kind of pressure inside of 24 hours. Not a hard decision for people just trying to keep the lights on for 240 kids. I said as much. "I don't even blame them," my son said, something raw and exhausted in it. "I'd have made the same call sitting in their chair. That's the part that gets me. And the suitcases." His jaw worked before anything came out. "She filed this morning. Papers were already drawn up before he even called her. He had them ready before he came to talk to me. Your father-in-law told her to file. Sunday night, right after he left our place." His voice dropped almost to nothing. "Said if she stayed married to somebody who couldn't hold a job, she was out of the family. All of it. Trust, property, everything." He stopped, swallowed. "Said our family wasn't the kind that mixes with theirs." In the quiet, my granddaughter turned around and held up that rabbit like she was presenting evidence in a very important case. "Papa?" she called out. "He says he's starving." I looked at that child, 6 years old on a dock next to 2 packed suitcases, completely unworried, because as far as she knew, the grown-ups had this handled. "She's right," I said out loud to my son. "Papa's got it." For about 10 seconds, sitting on those boards, I did not feel like a father comforting his son. I felt like something with teeth, because I knew something my son didn't know. I had known it for 29 years. I want to be clear that what I felt in that moment wasn't triumph. Hold on to that. It matters more at the end than it does here. "Grab the bags," I said, standing up. "Dad, where are we going?" "Grab them, son. We're not doing the rest of this on a fishing dock." I walked down and took my granddaughter's hand. "Come on, sugar. I think somebody's about to see something." He knew that tone. Every son learns it eventually. The tone that shows up maybe twice in a lifetime and doesn't leave room for follow-up questions. I watched him hear it, watched something in his shoulders straighten. The old instinct of a boy who'd learned a long time ago that when his father's voice went flat and quiet, something was finally about to move. I didn't ask him a single question until both suitcases were loaded into the truck bed and my granddaughter was buckled into the middle seat with her rabbit. Then I put the truck in gear, pulled out of the gravel lot, and turned onto the county road without saying where we were headed. "Dad," my son said, after about a mile of silence, "where are we going?" "Somewhere you should have seen a long time ago." He looked over at me. me, studying my face the way he used to as a teenager, trying to figure out whether I already knew about something he'd done before he'd confessed. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting for now, I said. Tell me the rest of it instead. All of it. From the beginning. So he did. He talked while my granddaughter hummed to her rabbit in the back seat, oblivious, and I kept my eyes on the road and let him lay it out in order. He told me about the 6 years of Sunday dinners out at the lake house, the way his father-in-law would talk over him at the table, correct him on things he hadn't gotten wrong, make little jokes at his expense that everybody else laughed at because the man cutting the joke was the one who'd paid for the house they were sitting in. He used to introduce me at parties as the coach. Never my name. He shook his head. 6 years, Dad. I let it slide every single time because I told myself it didn't matter, because what mattered was my wife and my daughter, and I wasn't going to blow up a family over some old man's manners. You were being patient, I said. I was being small, he said. There's a difference, and I only figured that out about an hour ago sitting on that dock. I let that sit in the cab a while before I said anything back. What did he say to you exactly? When he came by Sunday night? My son's jaw tightened. Told me I'd never been good enough for her. Said it straight out, no dressing it up. Said families like ours, meaning mine, meaning you and me, weren't built for families like theirs. Old money and new money, he called it. Except we're not new money. We're just no money as far as he's ever known. I kept my eyes on the road. Is that true? My son asked. And there was something underneath the question that hadn't been there 5 minutes earlier. Not quite suspicion, but the beginning of it. Are we no money, Dad? Because you drive a truck with duct tape holding the seat together. You've had the same haircut since before I was born. I always figured we were just comfortable, careful, not people that man would ever have reason to think twice about. What made you ask that just now? Because you're driving somewhere with a look on your face I've never seen before, he said. And because you just said I should have seen it a long time ago. Seen what, Dad? I didn't answer him right away, and I felt him watching me the whole time, waiting. 29 years ago, I said finally, I made a decision about how I was going to run my life, and I never told you or your mother the full shape of it, because I thought I was protecting this family by keeping it small and quiet. Hold on to that thought. We're about to arrive somewhere that's going to raise a lot of questions, and I'd rather answer them there than out here on the highway. Dad, you're kind of scaring me right now. Good, I said. Means you're listening. He sat back against the seat, running through possibilities in his head. I let him sit with that. You said 29 years, he said finally. Quiet, mostly to himself. That's before I was even born. It is. What happened 29 years ago? I buried my father, I said, and I read something in his handwriting that changed how I thought about money for the rest of my life. I'll tell you the whole story, but not in this truck. Let me get you there first. He didn't push after that. He just watched the road unspool ahead of us, past the last of the residential streets and toward the equipment yards most people never have a reason to look at twice. I turned the wheel and felt him sit up straighter beside me the second we left the county road. I turned in at a gate with no sign on it, just a number stenciled over the door of a low building set back behind a chain-link fence. Trucks were backed up to loading docks on the far side, and even from the lot you could hear the low hum of machinery running inside. Dad, my son's voice had changed entirely. What is this place? Mine, I said, cutting the engine. Has been since 1996. He sat there a second, looking at the buildings, at the trucks, at the general sense of scale to the place, and I watched him try to reconcile it with the man who'd raised him. You told me you worked in equipment financing, some back office thing for other people's businesses. I told you what you needed to know at the time, I said. This is an industrial laundry. We wash and process linens for hospitals, hotels, restaurants, anybody who needs that kind of volume handled and doesn't want to think about how it gets done. 260-some employees across 3 shifts. We move about 40 tons of linen a day through this facility alone. He didn't say anything. He just kept looking at the building like it was going to rearrange itself into something he recognized if he stared hard enough. Nobody thinks about companies like this, I said. And that's the whole business model. If you're thinking about your hotel sheets, somebody upstream already failed. We do it right, which means we do it invisibly. 29 years, he said slowly. You've had this for 29 years, and you drive a truck with duct tape on the seat. Still do. Did Mom know? She knew the parts that mattered, I said. She knew why I kept it small, even if I never told her every number. I'll get to the why. I promised you that in the truck, and I'm going to keep the promise. But I want you to see the place first, because it's easier to understand the reasoning once you've stood inside it. I got out, and after a second, he did too, helping his daughter down from the middle seat and taking her hand. She looked up at the building with the frank curiosity 6-year-olds bring to anything unfamiliar. Papa, is this where you work? This is where Papa's worked for a very long time, sugar. We walked in through the front doors, and I watched my son stop about 6 feet inside and tip his head back to take in the scale of the floor. The tunnel washers, the conveyors overhead, the folding lines where a shift of maybe 100 people moved in the rhythm of a crew that's been doing something right a long time. His mouth came open slightly. I still have that reaction myself, most days, walking in. An operations director I've had for 19 years spotted us from across the floor and came over, reading something off my face before I'd said a word. Everything all right? It will be, I said. This is my son. I need the office for an hour, and I need you to pull a file for me. She looked at my son, looked at the little girl holding his hand, and didn't ask any further questions, which is exactly why I've kept her around as long as I have. Which file? I'll come find you in a minute, I said. Let me get him settled first. I walked my son and his daughter up to the office that overlooks the whole floor through a wall of windows. I got my granddaughter set up at the little table with a coloring book and crayons, and she went straight to work, perfectly content. My son stood at the window looking down at the floor, still working through the arithmetic of it all on his face. "How big is this?" he asked, not turning around. "Really? Give me a number." "We'll get to numbers," I said. "First, I want you to understand something, because I don't want you walking away from today thinking this was ever about the size of it. It was never about the size." He turned around then. "Then what was it about?" "Come sit down," I said. "I'm going to tell you about your grandfather." He sat down across from me, and I told him about his grandfather, because there wasn't any way to make the rest of it make sense without starting there. My father ran a hardware store in a small town for 31 years, doing quietly, almost obscenely well, because he sold on credit to farmers who paid at harvest and never once had a bad year. In 1979, he paid cash for a quarter section of land, and somebody at the bank talked, and inside of 4 years, everything he'd built was gone, eaten slowly by people who'd known exactly what they were doing. A brother-in-law with a can't-miss feed operation that needed a signature on a note. A man he'd known since grade school who cost him $91,000 and then moved 3 states away. He died owing money on a store he'd owned free and clear for 2 decades, I told my son. The only thing I inherited was his customer ledger. 40 years of names, all in his own handwriting. I read the whole thing cover to cover the night after the funeral. "And that's when you decided," my son said slowly, "to keep everything quiet." "That's when I decided that what a man builds isn't safe the second other people can see the size of it," I said. "Right or wrong, that's what I took out of that ledger. So I built the least interesting company in the state, and I told nobody. Drove a used truck for 29 years and thought I was being wise." He sat with that a long moment. "Was it wise?" "About half of it," I said. "The half I got wrong is the part I need to fix today. Come on, there's something I want you to see downstairs." We walked back down onto the floor, and I found my operations director near the sort line. I asked her to pull the reconciliation file for a particular hotel and hospitality account. I gave her the name without saying whose father-in-law owned it, though by the look she gave me, I don't think she needed it spelled out. She had it up on a tablet inside of 4 minutes. 11 years on the books. Full-service linen contract, sheets, towels, tablecloths, kitchen linens, the whole operation across 6 properties. And every single year of that contract, we had quietly waived what's called a loss reconciliation, the standard industry clause where a customer pays for linen that doesn't come back. Guests take towels. Housekeeping throws stained sheets in the trash instead of the soiled bag. It's built into every contract in the business, tracked down to the piece with RFID chips sewn into the linen, and there's no arguing with the numbers once you pull them. For 11 years, I had waived it, not as a favor to the man who owned those hotels. He never knew the account was even mine, since everything routed through a servicing name that wasn't the company's own. I did it because his properties employed several hundred people trying to do an honest job, and because it was a rounding error to a business our size, and because that's simply how I'd been raised to run things. 11 years, my operations director said, turning the tablet around so my son could see the number. Cumulative net of the standard attrition allowance. "What's that in dollars?" my son asked, and I watched him brace for the answer the way you brace before a doctor tells you something. "Just under 400,000, she said. I let that sit in the air a second. My son looked at the number, then looked at me, and I could see the exact moment his mind went back to the $400,000 pledge his father-in-law had used to have him fired that same morning. The exact same figure, almost to the dollar. Sitting on the other side of a ledger the man had never known existed. "He's been receiving that every year," my son said, quiet, as a courtesy, "from us, this whole time. He has. And he's never known. Never. It's always routed through the servicing name on the paperwork. He signs, he pays. He's never had a single reason to ask who's actually on the other end of it. I had her draft a formal letter on our company letterhead, nothing punitive in the language, just a clear, factual accounting. 11 years of waived reconciliation, itemized by year, confirming the relationship exactly as it had always stood, along with a note that the account would be moving to standard terms going forward. I read it over once, signed it myself, and had her seal it. I walked it back upstairs to where my son was waiting by the window with his daughter, who had graduated from coloring to showing him every page of her book. I handed him the envelope. "Read that." He opened it slowly, and I watched his eyes move down the page, watched them stop on the company name at the top, watched him do the math a second time, this time with a full picture in front of him instead of a single number. His father-in-law's entire linen operation, 6 properties, financed on the good graces of the exact family the man had spent that morning declaring unworthy. "Dad." His voice had gone somewhere entirely different than it had been all day. "You've been sitting on this the whole time. Every single dinner. Every time he introduced me as the coach and never used my name." "I have. Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because I thought I was protecting you," I said. "Turns out I was just letting you walk into that lake house every Sunday carrying something you never should have had to carry alone." He folded the letter carefully, and for a second, just a second, I watched something in his shoulders let go. The particular relief of a man who believes the worst of it is finally over. He looked almost like he could smile. "This is enough," my son said, still holding the letter, just showing him this. "He'll never look at me the same way again." I didn't say anything back right away, because I hadn't decided yet how much more of it he he needed to hear standing in that office, or whether the rest of it should wait until we were back in the truck. He was still holding the letter, still looking pleased with himself, still thinking the worst of it was over. My granddaughter had moved on from her coloring book and was standing at the window now, watching the floor below with the same open curiosity her father had shown 20 minutes earlier. "Sit down a second," I said. He sat, the letter still in his hand, and I could see him trying to read my face, trying to figure out why I wasn't matching the relief he was clearly feeling. "There's something else you should know before you go into that meeting," I said, "about how this business works, about what that letter actually is and what it isn't." "What do you mean, what it isn't?" "It's proof. 11 years of proof that he's been living off our generosity the whole time he was looking down on us. It's proof of what already happened," I said. "That's all it is, a record, and records don't change anything going forward on their own. What changes something going forward is what we do next." He set the letter down on the desk between us, slower this time. "You're not talking about the letter anymore." "No," I said. "I'm talking about Friday." "What's Friday?" I hadn't planned to tell him this part yet. I'd meant to let him have the letter, let him carry it into that room and feel the weight of it settle his father-in-law down a notch, and leave the rest of it for later. Maybe never at all, depending on how things played out. But sitting across from him in that office, watching him hold 11 years of quiet generosity like it was a weapon he'd finally been handed, I understood something I hadn't fully let myself understand back on the dock. I had spent 29 years keeping my son in the dark because I told myself it was protecting him. And here I was again, still doing it, still deciding on his behalf what he was ready to carry and what he wasn't. "His entire operation runs on financing through us," I said. "Not just the linen contract, the whole inventory on that lot. Every car he's got, financed on paper that traces back to this company. It renews Friday." My son went very still. "You said his linen account was routed through a servicing name. Is that same arrangement, different account? He's never had a single reason to connect either one back to me because I built it that way on purpose." "How much are we talking about?" he said, and his voice had dropped into something quieter and more careful than it had been a moment ago. "Enough that if the renewal doesn't go through on the terms he's used to, he doesn't have a lot to sell come Monday." He sat back in the chair like something had physically pushed him there. "Dad, that's not a letter anymore. That's his whole business. I know what it is. You're telling me you could end him on Friday with a phone call. I'm telling you I've had that ability for 11 years and never once used it," I said. "Every renewal's gone through clean, same terms every single year because that's how I do business. I extend the courtesy until somebody gives me a real reason not to, and now you've got a reason." I didn't answer that right away because I wanted him to sit with the question a moment longer than I usually let people sit with things. "Now you've got a reason," I said finally. "Not me. This isn't my fight to finish for you. I brought you here to show you the ground you've actually been standing on. What you do with that is yours to decide." He looked down at the letter again, then back up at me, and I watched something shift behind his eyes. Not anger exactly, not yet, but the beginning of a kind of clarity I recognized because I'd felt something like it myself 29 years ago, reading my own father's ledger. 29 years, he said slowly. "You built all this, kept it hidden, and you never told me the real size of it. Not even after I married into a family that spent 6 years treating me like I didn't belong in their kitchen." "That's right. Why not, Dad? Not the ledger, not your father, not the philosophy of it. Why didn't you just tell me?" I owed him a real answer, not the same one I'd been circling since the dock. "Because your grandfather taught me that the moment people can see what you've built, they start finding ways to take pieces of it. And I decided a long time ago that the safest thing I could do for you was make sure nobody, including you, could ever hand him a number to go after. I thought I was protecting you from ever being a target. Instead, you just let me spend 6 years being a nobody," he said, and there was real heat in it now. The first real heat I'd heard from him since the dock. "Do you understand what that felt like? Sitting at that table every Sunday, watching him talk over me, knowing, somewhere in the back of my mind, that something about it never quite added up, and having no way to prove it because you'd made absolutely sure I couldn't?" "I understand it better than you think," I said. "I watched my own father's confidence get carved down to nothing before I was old enough to understand what was happening to him. I built my whole life trying to make sure that never happened to what I had. I never once considered that the same silence could hollow somebody out just as badly from the inside, sitting at a table with people who thought less of him because he seemed like he had nothing to protect." He was quiet a long moment. My granddaughter had wandered back over from the window and climbed into his lap without either of us noticing exactly when, and he wrapped an arm around her automatically, the way a father does. "There's something I don't understand," he said after a while. "You said you decided all this the night after the funeral, reading the ledger, but you didn't just decide to keep the money quiet. You decided to keep me quiet too, about what I was worth, about what family I actually came from." His jaw worked. "I grew up thinking we were careful people, thrifty. I never once felt poor exactly, but I never felt like there was anything underneath us either. Just enough. That's what I thought this whole family was built on. Just enough." "You were never supposed to feel like there wasn't enough," I said. "That was the whole point of doing it the way I did it. I wanted you to grow up without ever once worrying about money, without ever once being handed a number that could make you soft or careless, or a target for people who go looking for family with something to take." "But I wasn't soft," he said, and his voice cracked a little on it. "I was small. There's a difference, Dad, and you're the one who taught it to me, sitting right here in this office an hour ago. I spent 6 years at that man's man's table being small because I genuinely believed I had nothing to bring to it. Not money, not standing, nothing but a folding table and a borrowed van and a job that didn't pay what his daughter was used to. If I'd known, if I'd had even a fraction of what you just showed me, I'd have sat differently at that table. I'd have said things differently. I'd have let him talk over me a lot less. I know, I said, and it cost me something to say it plainly like that, without softening it. I told myself for 29 years that the not knowing was a gift I was giving you. Confidence built on your own 2 feet, nothing borrowed, nothing that could be taken away because you never had it to begin with. I was proud of that reasoning. I want you to understand I actually believed it. And now I think I built you a floor with no walls, I said. You always had something solid under you. You just never knew it was there, so you spent 6 years flinching at every gust of wind that man sent your way, bracing for a fall that was never actually possible. That's not confidence. That's just a man standing on solid ground who's been told his whole life that the ground could give out any second. He didn't say anything to that for a while. He just held his daughter a little tighter, and I watched him look down at her, at the part in her hair, at the same unworried way she'd been sitting on that dock a few hours earlier, still trusting completely that the grown-ups around her had things handled. I don't want that for her, he said finally, nodding down at his daughter without quite looking at me. I don't want her growing up not knowing what's actually under her. I don't care if that means she grows up different from how I did. I want her to know where she stands. Then you already know more than I did at your age, I said. That's not a small thing to walk out of this office with. So what happens Friday, he said finally, if I don't make a call? If I let it renew like it always has? Then it renews, I said. That's still your choice to make. I'm not going to make it for you. Not this time. He didn't answer right away. He just sat there with his daughter on his lap and the letter on the desk in front of him, and I could see him turning something over that went a lot deeper than a business decision. Something about 6 years of dinners, and a nickname that wasn't his name, and a debt nobody involved had ever known existed until about an hour ago. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. My operations director. Excuse me a second, I said, and stepped toward the window, though there wasn't really anywhere private to go in that office, and I think we all understood I wasn't stepping away so much as bracing. You need to see the renewal schedule, she said. No preamble, which is how I've always known her to open a call when something's actually wrong. Not the summary, the real one. What am I looking at? The floor plan renews Friday, she said. It's renewed quietly every year on the same terms, because nobody's ever flagged the account for a full review, including me, including you, going all the way back. Nobody's actually pulled his numbers in 3 years, and now you have. Now I have, she said. His default ratio's been sitting over threshold since spring. If we run this as a real review instead of an automatic rollover, he doesn't renew on these terms. He might not renew at all. I stood there with the phone against my ear, looking through the glass at my son, who was watching me with the letter still resting on the desk in front of him and his daughter still curled into his side, and I understood, standing in that spot, that the letter I'd just handed him, 11 years of quiet generosity on a linen contract, had never actually been the real thing. It had felt like the reveal. It had felt like enough. It was only ever the door standing in front of the actual room. Run the review, I said. Full terms, no courtesy extensions this time. That's his whole inventory. That's the man's entire operation, not just a piece of it. I know exactly what it is, I said. Run it. Friday. I hung up and turned back around. My son was already standing, the letter forgotten on the desk, watching my face with an expression I hadn't seen on him since he was much younger, somewhere between fear and the specific kind of hope a boy has when he thinks his father might actually be about to fix something that's been broken a long time. What was that? He said. I told him. All of it, in plain terms this time. No more circling. The floor plan financing, the 3 years nobody had reviewed, the default ratio sitting over threshold since spring, the fact that a real review before Friday meant his father-in-law's entire dealership inventory was suddenly, genuinely at risk in a way it had never been before that morning. He sat back down slowly, like his legs had made the decision without consulting the rest of him. You're going to let it fail, he said, on purpose. This isn't a letter anymore, Dad. This is his whole life. I'm going to stop protecting it, I said. There's a difference. And until about an hour ago, I don't think either one of us understood which one he'd been living under this whole time. He built his entire business on the assumption that nobody was ever going to look closely enough to notice how thin the ice actually was. I'm the only one who ever had a reason to check, and for 11 years, I didn't. Why not? Because I don't run my business as a weapon, I said. I run it as a business. I extend courtesy to accounts in good standing because that's simply how I operate, and his account was in good standing, and none of what he was doing to you had crossed my desk in any form I could act on. Today, it did. My son was quiet a long moment, turning the letter over in his hands without really looking at it anymore. There's more, I told him. He doesn't renew Friday, not the way he thinks he does. What does that actually mean, though? Say it plain. It means, I said, he's about to find out who actually owns every car sitting on that lot. And it isn't him. It's never been him. 3 years of numbers nobody checked, because I never made anybody check them, because I extended the same silent courtesy to his floor plan that I extended to his linen account. That courtesy ends Friday. Both of them do. And if I ask you not to, if I tell you to call her back right now and let it renew clean, same as always. I looked at my son a long moment, at the way he was holding his daughter a little tighter than he had been a minute ago, and I understood that this was the actual question underneath everything else we'd talked about that day. today. Not what I had built, not what I'd kept quiet, but what kind of man he was going to choose to be now that he finally had a choice to make it all. Then I'd call her back, I said. This was never about what I wanted to do to him. It was about you finally having the information to decide for yourself instead of me deciding it for you by never telling you it existed. He didn't answer right away. He sat there with the letter, with his daughter, with 29 years of silence sitting on the desk between us in the shape of a single sheet of paper, and I watched him work through something that wasn't going to resolve itself in the next 30 seconds, and I let him have the time to do it without pushing. I need to think, he said finally. Take all the time you need, I said. Friday isn't until Friday. My granddaughter, who had been quiet through most of this in the particular way children go quiet when they sense something serious happening around them without understanding the shape of it, tugged on her father's sleeve. Daddy, she said, are we still getting ice cream? And my son who had walked into that building 2 hours earlier believing his entire world had just come apart on a fishing dock, looked down at his daughter, and something in his face came loose for just a second. Something that had nothing to do with letters or floor plans or 29 years of quiet. We are, baby, he said. I promise. We didn't get ice cream until later that afternoon, after my granddaughter had fallen asleep against her father's shoulder in the truck, and I'd driven them both back to my place instead of dropping them at an empty house that no longer felt like it belonged to anyone. My son carried her in and laid her down on the bed in what used to be his room, and when he came back out to the kitchen, he didn't say anything for a while. He just stood at the counter with his hands flat on it, staring at nothing. You never answered me, he said finally. Back at the office. What happens if I tell you to call her back? I already told you I'd call her back. And if I don't tell you anything, if I just let Friday happen the way it's going to happen without me saying a word either way, then it happens, I said. That's still yours to decide, or not decide. I'm not going to make it easier on you by pretending there's a version of this where nobody has to choose. He was quiet a long moment, turning something over that I couldn't see the shape of from where I was standing. 6 years, he said, mostly to himself. 6 years of being the coach. 6 years of watching him introduce me like I was hired help he'd gotten used to having around. He looked up at me. You had the ability to end all of it whenever you wanted, and you just let me sit there. I did. Why? Because I thought silence was the same thing as protection, I said. I was wrong about that for 29 years, and I only understood how wrong this morning, sitting on a dock watching you try to make yourself small enough to disappear. He didn't say anything back to that. He just looked at me across the kitchen, and for a second I saw my father in his face. Not the version I remembered from before everything came apart, but the version from after. The one who'd stopped believing anything he built was ever really his to keep. Call her, he said. Tell her to run the review. You're sure? I'm not sure of anything today, he said, but I'm done being the only one in that family who doesn't know what's actually underneath him. I picked up my phone off the counter and dialed.